Good afternoon to all of you calling in on this session from 4 till 5 for me. I think that's different in other time zones. We're going to talk on progress on the PPCA engagement with the financial sector, and also I think celebrate some new memberships to the coalition. So that's I think very good. We see the coalition growing. What I will start with is a short recap of the ministerial PPCA Private Finance Roundtable. That was last month. Ministers Wilkinson and Trevelyan met with Mark Carney and high-level representatives of leading global financial firms. And the overarching theme emerging there was that capital is speaking, that institutions are moving to consider climate in their portfolios, and that the debate is no longer a trade-off between environment versus economy. Participants also noted that phasing out coal is the single most important commitment required to meet the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement, that economics of coal have shifted, with markets now seeing climate risk as an opportunity as we're only at the front end of the shift of capital. Thirdly, the lack of data is not an excuse for lack of action, and the TCFD, an acronym I think known to most of you, has an important role to play. And fourthly, it is essential that we ensure that a coal phase-out happens in a way that does not harm fragile economies in developing and emerging markets. Then there has been progress has been made on finance principles. And participants in the roundtable also noted that phasing out coal-fired electricity is one of the most important steps to tackle the climate crisis. And financial institutions are the key to making a global coal phase-out a reality. It's also encouraging to see that more and more institutions are moving capital away from coal power, with its stranded asset risks and low returns, to clean energy. But we need to accelerate the progress on ending coal in the months and years to come. The large number of coal power plants still projected to be built are able to undermine our global efforts for carbon neutrality. And in line with the appeal by the Secretary General of the UN in New York in 2019, the PPCA is committed to stop building new coal power plants by 2020 and quickly move to renewable energy, phasing out coal for good. The PPCA's finance principles, co-created with the financial sector, are a clear and credible set of commitments for financial institutions to make this move. Over the past months, several progressive financial institutions representing $1.6 trillion in assets have signed the PPCA finance principles, bringing the total number of financial institutions up to 21. And I'm going to mention the new members as of today. CDPQ that from Canada, CalPERS from the US, MNG from the UK, Pension Denmark from Denmark, of course, the pension fund ABP from the Netherlands, Utilities National Grid in the UK, Ontario Power Generation in Canada. It's great that CalPERS is able to join us here today in this session, and I would now like to give the floor to Anne Simpson, Managing Investment Director at CalPERS. But before I do that, I would like to quickly let the audience know that we will finish the session today with a Q&A, and you can pose your questions for this session via the Q&A link that is below the video feed. And before I hand over to Anne, I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this session. My name is Marcel Beukenboom. I'm the climate envoy for the Netherlands, and I have been involved in the PPCA for several years now. And I have to say, as a climate diplomat, this vehicle, this coalition, is a very powerful tool. It has been over the past couple of years, and it promised to be even more than that in the years to come, just fulfilling those promises that we made in Paris. And now over to you for your message.
Well, Marcel, thank you so much for that kind introduction. congratulations to the Powering Past Coal Alliance. There are so many features of this work that are vitally important, and at the heart of this initiative is partnership. And that's a recognition that, yes, money talks, the power of finance is extremely important in the energy transition, but money can't do it on its own. We also need the policy. So let me share with you a little bit about how CalPERS is approaching the climate change transition, and also flag not just what we're doing, but the importance of the financial system finding a way to overcome the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is we all rely upon the wider environment to produce the economic opportunity into which we can invest. So there are no pension returns unless we actually pay attention to protecting the environment and dealing with environmental risk. So the way we've approached it at CalPERS is to acknowledge in our investment beliefs, that investment is not just about money. Might sound a little paradoxical, but what we say in our investment beliefs is that long-term sustainable value creation requires effective stewardship of three forms of capital. That's finance, that's human capital, but also physical capital. In other words, the natural world is an essential part of us understanding our responsibilities in the investment process. So if we understand that, then that means that that finance, the people, the institutions that provide financial capital, have got three things to do. So the first is through the power of engagement. We are the owners of the companies. Often we're the owners of the financial institutions, both in public and private markets. So we have this opportunity through our understanding of risk, our understanding of where value is created, to make sure that we are stewards in this process. So, you know, when CalPERS looked at its portfolio in the run-up to the Paris Agreement, we found in our 10,000 holdings, think about this, 10,000 holdings, less than 100 companies were responsible for the 85% of the emissions. And it was this insight that gave rise to Climate Action 100 Plus, because if we've got 100 companies, just to give you another sense of scale, these 100 companies are the third source of emissions on the planet. So number one, China, number two, the United States, number three, just these 100 companies. So, and coal in the energy mix has a role right through the economy and the transactions upon which all these companies are relying. So the power of engagement in this transformation of the economy is extremely important. And in Climate Action 100 Plus, and I know today we have many of the signatories, investors doing the good work here. We are well past the $50 trillion mark in terms of signatories. And what that is leading to is bringing down the demand for coal through our ability to engage, for example, with utilities. So if you look at the biggest utilities in the United States, even though the policy environment was not that hospitable to this, we have the biggest utilities like Duke Energy, like AES, like Xcel, and others have made a net zero commitment. And what that means is they will be transitioning off coal, and that creates the new demand for renewables and low carbon alternatives. However, we are missing a couple of things in this process. Money can talk, but it can't move unless we have a couple of policy measures. The first is disclosure. So we want to see climate risk and, of course, opportunity integrated into financial reporting. Best practices and frameworks are there to build on, but we need IFRS, we need US GAAP to get this into the account so that it can go through the cycle of being timely, assured, and also ultimately signed off by the auditor. So that's the next big thing. Money won't move without information that it really relies on. Secondly, there's an emerging role for supervisors of banks, because we know that in the next few years, there's going to be a huge multi-trillion-dollar rollover of short-term debt in the fossil fuel industry. So there is a huge role in the whole question of credit appraisal and, you know, for supervisors in considering their tests on fit and proper, making sure that boards of directors are climate competent, and also we're getting the credit appraisal and risk reporting. And finally, policymakers need to sort out the perverse incentives that we have, because there are subsidies to fossil fuels which are coming out of taxpayers' pockets, and that money is sorely needed elsewhere. But also we're lacking a price on carbon. So that means carbon gets a free ride in the markets, and the cost of carbon is being felt and borne by sectors, vulnerable communities, and of course, ultimately the taxpayer. All of that needs to be brought back into the cost curve for fossil fuels. So I think there's a lot to do for the financial sector. There's absolutely a lot to do for policymakers, but the critical message here, I think, is partnership. We have got the opportunity to drive change, and powering past coal is an important part of getting to that net zero target. So Marcel, again, thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing, and all power to the Powering Past Coal Alliance.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks for these compliments, I think, for the Alliance itself. I absolutely agree that element, the Alliance, is key to its success, although we are still far from where we want to be. And what you also say, I think, is important, is the role. You said money talks, but money is also a means to an end, and that, I think, has been strongly recognized by this coalition, that we can use the leverage of money to actually bring our goals closer. And on that, we have Erich Usher with us, the head of UNEP FI, for a scene-setting presentation and try to work out those interlinkages between coal and finance and the role of financial institutions. So, Erich, over to you. And I hope others are you already muted, Anne. So thanks. Over to Erich.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Anne. And, Marcel and Anne, and to the organizers for I think this session on the event and the impressive progress that the PPCA has been making. We're going to focus here on the role of finance in essentially getting us off the dirty coal habit. The discussion is going to address whether the finance industry is an enabler of the transition or a barrier to change, whether it's a change taker or a change maker. I think, more broadly, we have to think about whether the actions taken are going to be driven by the risks, by the opportunities, or maybe even a wider, let's say, a purpose-driven imperative. I think every financier, like every economic actor, exists within a continuum. And some are leaders, including several organizations we're going to hear from today, seeing the changes underway in a more strategic lens, and one of the imperative to set ambitious business targets around the race to zero, and to really seriously engage with our clients in getting there, and spoke to that a little bit. And leadership means understanding that climate action poses new types of risks and opportunity, physical climate risks, transition risks, we're hearing about a lot through the TCFD and otherwise, and also I think this newly appreciated area of liability risks. The risks of climate change and the responses to it are seeping into corporate culture and the financial ecosystem. And it's really no longer possible to keep one's head deep in the sand and claim ignorance of the science, to shift responsibility and point fingers. I think one of the interesting dynamics, I talked about liability. We really are moving quickly towards corporate boards no longer being able to secure director liability insurance unless climate change is properly being handled, properly instilled in terms of their corporate governance. Leading financial institutions, they also need to realize that the climate transition poses the largest opportunity for their industry in generations. Financing the repurposing of our industrial system, of our food system, of our energy system, how we build and how we move around. Green energy, green hydrogen, green steel, green cement, even green ammonia for fertilizer and more. It's really, how do we rethink almost everything that we do? All this really starts with decoupling from dumping and powering past coal. The energy source that started the Industrial Revolution is no longer needed to refashion it. So who will and must lead this transformation? I think the financial sector definitely needs to play a catalytic role and to be working to back corporate and public leadership in this area. And for us, this role really took a big step forward, and some examples, particularly around the Climate Summit in September 2019. Two specific initiatives that were launched then was a group of investors and a group of banks who separately launched important new initiatives. There were 12 investors that formed the UN-convened Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, including AXA and CalPERS, who are with us today. And this leader has really led, this group has really led the financial sector engagement towards net zero. Not only aiming to fully phase out carbon exposures by 2050, but much more importantly, to already issue 5-year milestone targets, starting with 2025, just around the corner. So it's really about what we do today, not what we leave to the next generation to worry about. The Asset Owner Alliance has issued an important position on thermal coal, which maybe Sylvain will speak about, and has led the UN Secretary General to meet with the Alliance CEOs recently now in January, and to later describe their efforts as the gold standard for the slew of commitments to net zero. Since the launch of this Asset Owner Alliance, we've seen important responses from other parts of the financial system. A group of asset managers have stepped up, including Robeco, to form the Net Zero Asset Manager Initiative. AXA is also taking a leading role in the establishment of a Net Zero Insurance Underwriting Alliance, which is the core business of insurance companies. Meanwhile, the banking industry has also made some big advances. In September 2019, 130 bank CEOs launched, alongside the UN Secretary General Guterres, the UN Principles for Responsible Banking. The Desjardins CEO, Guy Cormier, was one of the 5 CEOs who spoke then. And these principles commit signatories to align their financing with the needs of society as defined by the UN SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. And since then, many banks are following through, beginning the process of realigning their portfolios and moving beyond coal and other fossil fuel sources. Leadership takes sound government action, as Anne has pointed out. Leadership takes corporates and financial actors working together to align towards managing these new planetary risks and refashioning our industrial system devoid of fossil fuels. And leadership also takes unilateral action as well, not only waiting for the world to change on its own, but also creating change from within. And I would like to go a little bit further back in time. In October 2018, even before the initiatives I mentioned got started, Thomas Buberl, the CEO of AXA, announced that the world's largest commercial insurer of commercial properties would no longer underwrite in North America the construction and operation of coal plants, coal mines, oil sands extraction and pipelines, as well as Arctic drilling. This was truly a shot across the bow of the coal industry in North America, where previously no other major insurer had taken such steps. This was leadership. This was the act of a change maker. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Marcel as chair and look forward to an important discussion and continued progress in working together to relegate coal to the history books. Thank you.
Thank you for these remarks, Eric. And I think you touch upon several very important issues that the panel discussion that we will now have will definitely react to. But it's interesting, one thing I would like to highlight, that of course this whole electricity or energy sector, and especially that part that is that's using fossil fuels, got an objective pushed upon them by negotiators from elsewhere, the climate negotiators, who came up with this idea, for the very good reasons, I'm one of them, that we have to phase out coal because we want to keep global warming within limits that are still livable in the longer term. So your remark on this transition being an opportunity is perhaps the key to where we want to go to, and that is, I think, and I go back to Anne's remarks as well, the partnering around that and seeing how we can work together on that transition is key to the success that we want to have. Now over to the panel that we have, discussing that transition and see how organization can support the phase out of unabated coal power successfully. I will introduce the 4 panelists one by one, but to begin with, they all get a 4-minute time slot to introduce what they have to say, and I will help them on the way with a little question. And I'll start with Gildas Poissonnier, the Director for Sustainability and Responsible Finance with Desjardins. Gildas, welcome to this panel and welcome to this session. And just a kick-off question for you. What is the key challenge in implementing coal policies internally and in engaging in advocacy among companies? Over to you.
Thank you, Marcel. First of all, thanks to PPCA for this great session and discussion. Obviously, it depends where you start as an organization on the topic, but building on our experience at Desjardins, I would say that successful internal implementation depends on 4 things. First, you need a very clear tone at the top. Without it, large financial institutions may get lost in details because coal phase out, as simple as it may look, needs to be discussed in multiple situations, ranging from diversified energy groups to diversified natural resource companies, and with many different teams: insurance, investment, capital markets. At Desjardins, we had the chance to have this clear tone at the top from the very beginning when the policy was first adopted in fall 2017. It was required that the policy apply to all business sectors of Desjardins Group, including insurance, asset management, investment banking, and commercial banking. Second, you need to have an agile and legitimate decision-making process when it comes to implementing the policy. Why? Because teams need to know where they can get quickly an answer they can rely on when they know everybody in the organization will stand behind. For that, you need a go-to team that is able to properly document a case, its context from a business perspective, as well as from an environmental one, and a decision-making body that can quickly make a decision, taking into account the policy and its implementation guidelines. At Desjardins, for example, we have strongly reinforced this decision-making process in the past 3 years. We now have a 12-people VP level Environmental, Social and Governance Committee that meets monthly and may also be called upon for decision-making on difficult cases. Third, we also need clear implementation guidelines to carry over time the spirit of the law, if you like, as team members evolve, change, rotate. Basically, this is your insurance policy for a sound, reliable, and consistent implementation of the policy over time in your organization. At Desjardins, we have developed robust implementation guidelines based on benchmarking of best practices, as well as through proactive engagement with advocacy NGOs. Our coal policy implementation guidelines have been actually recognized by several NGOs active in that space, such as Reclaim Finance or Banktrack. The fourth part for successful internal implementation, I would say, is multiple communication channels. Teams in large organizations need to be frequently reminded that such policy exists. In that perspective, training, news, due diligence questionnaire, processes, internal processes are all excellent and complementary channels to be leveraged to make sure the message reaches the intended audience. On the external front, to engage in advocacy among companies, I would say the main challenge is to demonstrate that coal phase-out policies are here to support our partners in making sound choices from a risk perspective and helping at the same time identify opportunities for those companies to transform their business model and pivot in a just transition perspective. This requires research, training, as well as a great deal of diplomacy from our business teams so that they are better able to articulate the reasons behind our coal policy from a business perspective. Building on larger initiatives such as PPCA provides an additional layer of legitimacy for collective engagement. And last, at an individual company level, I think you need to actively engage with that company to make sure you understand correctly its situation, as well as its long-term objectives with regards to coal phase-out, to make sure you won't be making any decision based on partial or incorrect information. Proactive due diligence will only make your case and your decision-making stronger once you have all that information in hand.
Thank you, Gildas. Before I go to the next speaker on the panel, I would like to remind the audience that they can engage with the speakers in the chat. It's very quiet in the chat at the moment. I'm sure that it's because they are speechless listening to you, but there is a possibility for interaction. So please join us in this discussion. Maybe one quick question for you, Gildas, because it strikes me that you speak quite a bit about communication, both internally and externally. Is this different now we have an environmental goal than it would be, for example, if the objective communicated from the top was we are going to double our turnover next year?
I think it's the topic for the main internal stakeholders is probably new for them. You know, it's a different kind of subject for most of the team, so they need to be able to really better understand where it comes from, why it is required, and I would say like traditional business topics like turnover, as you mentioned, is much more readily grasped by the team. So really there is an education piece that your organization can't neglect because it's really what drives the long-term action, you know, and the continuity of your policy implementation. So communication is absolutely key on the day-to-day basis, yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Over to the next speaker, Cristina Cedillo Torres, the lead for European Utilities Engagement at Robeco, a Dutch firm. Question to kick you off, Cristina. What is the key challenge in advocating for European companies to seek alternatives to new unabated coal-fired power plants, and perhaps combined with that, advance a credible public commitment to the phase-out of unabated coal within PPCA timeframes? And maybe you could say something about the global initiatives like Climate Action 100+ as you go. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcel, and thank you also for having me today in this panel, indeed giving me the opportunity to present on the engagement perspective, specifically from the European perspective. So at Robeco, yeah, we have been engaging with electric utilities on carbon emissions for several years, and since the past 3 years, we have been also an active member engaging collectively under the Climate Action 100+ initiative. And I must say, I think we have seen significant progress in this sector, as the vast majority of European utilities have now committed to carbon neutrality. I think this is a very encouraging result, but of course, setting targets is not the end of the story. At the initiative, we're now at a critical moment of the engagement where I think investors are really asking from companies for a clear transition plan, a strategy to prepare their business for the energy transition, and also that is backed with investments for clean technologies. So the coal phase-out plan, of course, is a very important component of the transition plans for electric utilities, and I think there is no question that coal must be phased out from the energy system as soon as possible. I think we all know there's very strong arguments from the climate, financial, and also a technological perspective of why actually renewables could be a better solution to transition. So I think the topic of phasing out coal is actually more challenging from the perspective that it has significant social and political implications. So it is a process that, of course, requires extensive consultation with regulators. They are the ones who set the timelines closures. And I think we have seen how some markets where the phase out is now on an advanced stage. We see that policy measures where they're very critical in achieving this. For example, we have seen how carbon prices and national governments setting deadlines to phase out coal has helped utilities to significantly accelerate their phase out plans in recent years. So I really echo also what Anne was mentioning, how policy is a very important driver for the energy transition. And we, of course, need leadership from policymakers and regulators to make this happen. I'm very hopeful that the EU Green Deal and the policies that will be implemented to support this will really remain a very important driver for the coming decades to really make sure that net zero in the region is achieved. But another significant challenge that we see going forward is also addressing the effects of the transition in regional and local levels. I think there are several regions in Europe where the livelihoods of a large portion of the population is dependent on a coal-based economy. And the low carbon economy, of course, is expected to compensate for the job losses at the level of the whole economy. But of course, the impact will really be felt at the regional level, because these jobs will not necessarily appear at the same time and at the same place as where the jobs are being lost. So I think this really highlights the need for just transition policies that are relevant to the specific context and tailored to these coal-intensive regions, and therefore also the need to accelerate deployment of clean technologies. So in our engagement, we have seen some good examples of how companies can contribute to the just transition. Of course, they have a role to play by making agreements with trade unions in order to make sure that their employees, they can have redeployment, reskills, retention, or whenever appropriate, also early retirement. But we have also seen examples of utilities that also try to contribute to regional economic development by ensuring that the sites where the decommissioned power plants are located get a conversion plan that is developed jointly with stakeholders. So this really means that you find jointly a new purpose for these sites that can help reuse these facilities for other purposes than energy generation. So you can have other activities like tourism, hospitality, research centers, etc. And these are some things that we have seen emerging, and I think it's an interesting example of what companies can do. As I mentioned also, of course, EU policies will remain a very important driver for climate action, and we really see momentum is building in this region. And it's important for investors that we continue engaging with the power sector and continue supporting the implementation of transition plans towards net zero. And on this point, I think there's also one important development to mention for institutional investors, which is the emergence of a say on climate resolution. Investors are now requesting companies to give shareholders the opportunity to vote on companies' transition plans at the annual shareholder meetings of these companies. So currently there is no way for shareholders to hold top management or the board accountable in a consistent manner for the development and implementation of a transition plan to net zero. So this say on climate resolution could be a helpful tool for companies to, on the one hand, gain feedback on whether their transition planning is in line with investor expectations. And also, this resolution also benefits shareholders by giving them the opportunity to hold directors to account for the successful design and implementation of a plan. So we have seen companies in the oil and gas and mining industry putting their transition plans to vote later this year. And we really hope to see utilities joining as well, as it can help advance as you say, credible commitments from companies to decarbonize their energy generation assets. And I think this is something of strategic importance for this industry. So with that, I hand it over back to you, Marcel.
Thank you, Christina, for this view into your world. And I like it that you speak quite a bit about doing things jointly, partnerships, shared responsibilities. One thing, and I think also the words you say about a just transition, making this a possibility without leaving anyone behind. There's another term that I feel underneath your story, and that is responsibility. Whose responsibility is it that this will become a just transition? And let me phrase this question a bit bluntly. If a coal-fired power plant, a company, becomes no longer competitive because of a combination of market regulation, but also market powers, because other sources of energy just become cheaper, as we have seen with wind energy, whose responsibility is it to help the workers in those plants transition to other jobs, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it really is a combination of efforts. I think indeed partnership continues to be a key term on these type of situations, because I do feel that on the one hand, the company is of course responsible for its employees, and it should contribute to the well-being of the employees. But I think also together with governments, they should come up with an agreement on how to address the potentially large large parts of the population that will be affected, because I think what we're speaking of now is not a few coal plants, but I think we're really speaking about a different magnitude of shifts in employment. And I think especially for those coal-based regions, this is very critical, where you really need to have a collaborative approach to find a solution, because probably reskilling employees will not necessarily mean that that those employees will end up in the same company. It could be, but it could be not. So I think we really need to think very broadly about this.
Okay, thank you. And although I would love to continue this conversation, I need to move on to the next speaker in this panel, and that is Maarten Vleeshouwer. He is head of the Paris Agreement Capital Transition Assessment, so-called PACTA. Maarten, over to you on the opportunities for financial institutions to accelerate phasing out coal investments in their corporate lending portfolio, and specifically, of course, as you are responsible for PACTA, by using measurement methodologies. Maarten, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Marcel, for having me, and it's great to be here. I think, as a very, very short answer before I give a bit more detail, I think there are quite some opportunities for financial institutions to kind of use measurement methods to get a sense of their coal exposure and get a sense of where they stand. I think it's really a booming field. I think we see a lot of financial institutions trying to work on integrating climate considerations. And that can, of course, in the short term, perhaps lead to a bit of confusion, as maybe there is a kind of boom of approaches. But I think that's fine. It's showing that we are trying to progress. And that's the most important thing, because ultimately we learn by doing. And I also have to say that, it's almost not even about if there are opportunities for measurement, it's almost a prerequisite. I think, I didn't go to business school, but I'm sure that this is said there very often. You can't manage what you can't measure, right? So if you're serious about phasing out coal and shifting to clean energy, then you need to know what you are financing and what the plans of those companies are. You know, are they building out new coal-fired power plants, or are they switching to renewables? And this is actually the thinking behind PACTA. So PACTA is developed by the 2 Degrees Investing Initiative together with a whole range of partners. And 2 Degrees is a nonprofit think tank. And what we did about a year and a half ago is start working with a group of 18 global banks, many also signatory to the Principles of Responsible Banking or the Collective Commitment on Climate Action, to bring this kind of Paris alignment measurement to corporate lending portfolios. And effectively what PACTA tries to do is to measure what needs to happen in certain sectors in terms of decarbonization with what the companies in those sectors are planning to do in terms of kind of their production, their emissions for the coming 5 years. In terms of coal exposure in particular, the tool can then measure your exposure to both coal mining and coal-fired power capacity. And it's able to tell you whether your investments in coal mining and coal power are aligned with the Paris Agreement or are aligned with various climate change scenarios, and which companies are driving your results. You know, the way that works is that we're effectively measuring how fast, we compare how fast coal mining is declining, how fast coal-fired capacity needs to phase out in these climate change scenarios, in this Paris Agreement, and then whether the companies are actually doing that. You know, what are their capital expenditure plans? What are their production plans for the coming 5 years? And so this gives you a sense of kind of where you stand and where the companies that you finance stand, and therefore whether or not you may wish to exclude them or engage with them, or however you kind of want to take that information forward. But you know, it's crucial information in if and how you are phasing out coal-fired power plants, coal mining, and, you know, transitioning to renewable power. So I think, you know, there's lots of opportunities out there. It's always a bit maybe unsatisfactory when someone from PACTA goes to say, you know, you should use PACTA. That's definitely not what we're trying to do. But just to indicate, you know, that there are options out there, and that measurement is a very, very crucial step in trying to actually manage your exposures.
It sounds all too logical, and you almost wonder why not every company uses tools like this, because as a CEO, I think you want to make informed decisions. Do you have an explanation for that this is not widely used, and why are not all companies and financial institutions knocking on your door?
No, well, I mean, I think it is widely used. I don't think necessarily everyone uses PACTA, and that's absolutely fine. And I think on the PACTA front, I mean, we started with the launch, I think, in September with PACTA for corporate lending portfolios. Since then, more than 70 banks have downloaded all the materials they need to work with this. Obviously, what we do is kind of open source and free of charge. So perhaps, you know, the ease of use is not as great as if you buy something commercially. But I'm sure that almost every financial institution is either working with a third-party service provider or with these kind of more open source initiatives like PACTA or PCAF or you name it, to try and try to get a grip. So I think everybody's knocking on everybody's door probably.
News, Maarten. Thanks. We will be back to you later on in the panel discussion. And I see we are running behind of time, but it's of course my fault. So I quickly transition to Sylvain Vanston, the group head of climate change at AXA. Sylvain, how can we ensure effective coal disengagement via systemic approaches? Because that is something that I think you can say something about. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcel. Thanks for the invitation. I realize I'm the last speaker. We don't have a whole lot of time, so I have a few slides and I'll run them through quite quickly. They will answer your question. So shall I share my screen? Okay, hold on. There you go. Full screen. So I don't want to repeat what has been said already, but really phasing out coal is the simplest thing to do when you're kicking off a climate strategy. In our case, AXA, We initiated coal divestment in early 2015, about 6 months before COP21. Clearly, we had a strong risk-based message that we wanted to send out both internally and externally. But this was also some sort of political move. We wanted to show that a large mainstream investor could do such a thing without being forced to do through a mandated decision. And I think it was quite helpful in the run-up to COP21. It also led us to develop a fully fledged climate strategy with all kinds of components. And I will not go through all of these, but basically this was also for us the starting point of a much broader and quite ambitious strategy, which very regularly gets ramped up. In fact, Eric mentioned a few milestones. So it is a very important part of the AXA DNA, so to speak. Now, what are we talking about really when we say we have a coal policy? This is our current policy. As you can see, it has different thresholds, 5 thresholds. Some of them are dynamic, some of them are relative, others are absolute. And quite importantly, as Eric mentioned, actually since 2017 and 2018, these apply both to our investments and to underwriting. And I'll come to underwriting because it's actually a very important part of our strategy. As you can see, we have right now pretty stringent thresholds for existing coal. We're even more demanding when it comes to companies building new coal mines and new coal plants, where we pretty much phase them out absolutely today. And we also have a long-term coal phase-out policy, which is in effect 0% coal by 2030 in the EU and OECD region, and 2040 in the rest of the world. This is something obviously that we have to keep in mind when we do engagement. The total divested assets related to coal are about 4 billion euros. And perhaps even more importantly, the underwriting restrictions that we also pioneered in 2017 have, in our estimates at the time in 2018 and 2017, cost us about 100 million euros of non-renewed premiums from the companies concerned. So you can see on this simple diagram the way it works. We really went through 3 phases. The first phase, which I mentioned, was the coal divestment 2015, and we ramped up the thresholds, as you can see in this diagram. And then in 2017 with AXA Corporate Solutions, which was at the time our so-called commercial lines entity. So commercial lines is the insurance of large companies. And then later on, when we acquired the XL Group, we combined AXA Corporate Solutions with XL to create the AXA XL new entity. So we extended this underwriting restrictions to XL. This was a very tricky decision because AXA Corporate Solutions obviously was exposed to some coal business, but the XL Group was a much larger player and much more exposed, especially in America, in North America, and in Asia. Nonetheless, we decided to extend this fairly recent policy to AXA XL, and we ran off basically any coal plants, coal mines, standalones in certain business lines. Our latest iteration of our coal strategy, which is part of the broader climate strategy, was in 2019 when we ramped up several items. Also, that's when Eric also mentioned this when we joined the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. We decided to extend this coal underwriting restrictions to the client as a whole. So whereas initially, since 2017, we were banning coal plants and coal mines, since 2019, we've decided to ban entire clients when they breach our thresholds. That is actually quite a shock because that means we no longer cover, for example, their office buildings or their car fleets, and that is totally unrelated to coal. But the theory of change that we have is that when we no longer bring support to those clients, then they will want to go gradually below those thresholds. And actually those thresholds are shared by many of our peers. Here again, we also have this 0% threshold 2030 and 2040 that I mentioned. So by those 2 dates, we will have no longer anything related to coal in our underwriting and investment processes. This is actually very drastic when you think about it, but that's the only way we can perhaps keep up with the 1.5-degree target that science is asking us. Now, we get sometimes interesting effects like this. I mean, obviously, we win mandates, we get praises from Eric, from the media, from NGOs, etc. We get, lots of encouragements from our own employees. I don't know how to measure the financial upsides of that, but I know it's worth gold. And sometimes you get letters like that. And I think that is also worth gold. They're the future generations. Now, quickly, beyond what AXA does, a quick update on what is going on in the Paris finance marketplace, where we're trying, well, actually the regulators, supervisors, and commissions are trying to work on a broader market level approach. It all started in 2018 when our finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, made an address to the Climate Finance Summit, asking for a much more stringent approach from banks, insurance, pension funds in France regarding coal, and ask for this also to have coal criteria to be independently reviewed. This triggered a whole lot of activities, new commissions being created, observatories involving the AMF, our regulator, the ACPR, Banque de France, etc. Obviously, AXA and many of our peers were part of those various organizations. The idea is that we're drawing up market level initiatives that enable all of our peers, all of the financial services players, to phase out coal with a coordinated approach with specific thresholds and so on. And so on this slide quickly, and I don't want to take more time, I think I had only 4 minutes. These are the current developments around these market level places. This is very important because it's one thing when players like AXA or Allianz or Aviva, we voluntarily want to ramp up our climate ambition and come up, for example, with coal strategies, but also other transition bond, green bonds, etc. That doesn't mean that laggards or smaller firms that actually go under the NGO and media radar catch up. Some of them need that kind of initiatives, as you can see on this slide, to get moving. Once they start moving, they'll understand the virtue in doing so. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, and thanks for this presentation. Perhaps the organizers can share this with the people that join us for this session, because this was very interesting, and I'm sorry you had to rush it through, and that goes for all the speakers. I know you have so much more to say, and I look at the clock and we only have 9 minutes left. What I will do now is I will ask you all one question, and that has to do with this coalition as a whole, the PPCA. What do you think is needed in the next phase of the PPCA to maybe expand or deepen our efforts? Just give us a short advice how to move on, and perhaps you can relate in that answer to the reasons why you have joined or why you are interested in this coalition. There has been one question coming from the audience in the chat, and that is one for Gildas. So I will start with you. So hopefully you can give a short answer to this question and then go over to the next question that I asked. Is if you engage with your clients, how do you make it clear, or how did you make it clear that you need clear progress, a clear timeline, and significant changes that indeed can be measured for you to keep them on board? And how did they react to that? Gildas, over to you.
Thank you, Marcel. So on the first question, I think engagement with the companies is really the key, and being clear from the starting point. Being able to communicate clearly our policy. Our policy is available online, and the implementation guidelines as well. And then also it's a joint effort between the commercial teams, the people who have the relationship with the company we invest in or we provide finance to, so that they are able to articulate really the need for the change. Then you're right, there is the need to have to set clear targets and clear timeline for a change, and once again making sure that those timelines are clearly communicated to the client. with regards to the second question, so what's next for PPCA, and I think transparency is important. We have had a presentation from Martin on PACTA. There are booming set of approaches and tools, providing convergence in those tools, and supporting a transparent way of communicating what are the results of those different institutions. I think would be good to share progress and for all stakeholders involved to assess the way forward and the progress to date.
Thank you. Quickly over to you, Christina.
Yes, thank you. I think for us, what really strikes us as very important of this coalition is how clearly it has a very clear mission. It has a very clear message around the timelines that are needed to decarbonize, these specific sectors. And I think that is quite critical. If you can convey your message as concretely as this one, I think you can be a lot more successful. And there's no way better of doing that than in partnership with multi-stakeholder approaches. So that for us is really the added value of this coalition.
Perfect, and thank you for your concise answer. Maarten, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll also be concise, but I will say three things. One, I very much agree with Sylvain. So I agree, like the next step is really to try to have a bit more convergence and perhaps a bit more harmonization on approaches. And we try to take kind of the best of each approach and the best of each method. The second thing I think is in terms of the PPCA is really kind of like your first aim, secure commitments to phase out coal. I mean, we know there's still many governments building coal-fired power stations, so I think that really needs to be a priority. And the third is maybe even looking further down the future, are we gonna replicate the success of the PPCA on something non-coal, right? So Sylvain said it, coal is easy, so what comes after coal, where we're gonna have a powering past alliance?
To be honest, that is in the works already. We so work of that still behind the scenes, but thinking on that is actually taking place as we speak. So that is a very good advice. Therefore, I think you're absolutely right. There's more to do than just a coal phase out, as we know. Sylvain, also this last question for you before I wrap up.
Use the global coal exit list. We've been using it since 2017. It's a great database. It tells you who is building new coal plants and where, and to how many megawatts are concerned. It's very well researched. Of course, it's not devoid of inaccuracies, but it's very well researched and it's transparent. So any company can disagree with the figures concerning themselves, call up the organization, get that corrected. So it's a very powerful tool, and you know what? It comes for free. I think we also need to converge on common criteria. I alluded to this in the final slides, and Martin, you also mentioned this. It is quite important. And a simple sort of no-brainer, again, criteria is no new coal plants, frankly. That's pretty easy. And the PPCA should really stand, again and again against that. Finally, I put forth a proposition that no financial services company has the right to speak about climate change without a coal phase-out commitment. That is purely my own opinion. It's maybe not an AXA Group opinion, but I think that having out there climate strategies that do not address coal phase-outs is a problem for all of us.
Good, thanks. I like own opinions. They are often much more to the point than corporate opinions. So thanks for that last one. Maybe Anne or Eric, would you like to add something to what has been said?
Yes, thank you. I've just been chatting with Christina on the sides. It's wonderful to see the role of investors like Robeco and others on this call like AXA who are doing such wonderful work. I want really to remind all the investors that you already have the tools in your hands to take action. Now, there's the capital allocation process. Let's put that to one side. But shareholders elect the board of directors. They receive the report and accounts. They approve the appointment of the auditors. And what we need to do is see the fiduciaries of the world holding accountable the boards and the auditors who are overseeing all of this. There are new ideas, like say on climate, as Christina said, but right now we don't have the time really for advisory votes on new reports. I think we can drive this forwards by ensuring we have climate competent boards, auditors who are tuned in, and ensuring that the transition plans are integrated into the report and accounts. So no excuse for hanging around waiting. We can really just move forwards. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just got informed that Eric already left the virtual building. So this wraps it up for the speakers that we still have on board. And I just have to think back of my last physical meeting with international colleagues. That was the PPCA meeting in The Hague in March last year. I mean, didn't we know at that moment? It's incredible that we are now here and talking about these issues again. In the meantime, the PPCA hasn't sit idle for whatever reasons. It's really made progress. From my perspective as a climate diplomat, or maybe in this context I should say a coal diplomat, we really engage with countries and with companies to also financial institutions to help them and also sometimes push them to stop financing coal or to also find alternatives for that. And the tools that have been discussed in this past hour were part of that. And I think over this year and the past couple of days are a tribute to that. The alliance has grown, but also the tools of the alliance have grown as well. And I think in your conclusions now, you refer to some of those either in the making or already being used. And that is, I think, a very good sign that we are progressing. And we also see the political support that we have. I think from the very beginning, political leadership in this alliance has been key to its success. And I'm hopeful that this will continue also in a time where the political pressures are mounting sometimes, and as the light switches off automatically where I'm sitting, energy efficiency we call that, that are the good signs that we see. So kudos to the organization for organizing this, and thank you for the participants to join us here, and of course to the panelists for enlightening us with your insights and your experiences. Before I close, I'll just point the audience and the people listening in to 3 more sessions to come as part of this summit. Tomorrow morning, 8:30, and that is UK time, the opportunities of the race to net zero perspectives from the EU and Asia. In the afternoon, 2 o'clock London time, the Just Transition in Action, and there we talk about the labor perspective to all of this. We refer to that already in this session. And finally, 4 o'clock, Exploring Financial Mechanisms for Early Coal Retirement. Those are the things still to come. What we did last year at that session that I mentioned was that we made a nice summary and a good report, and I think the elements of the discussion there were used to make progress during the year. I'm sure that will happen here this year as well after this summit, and I thank you very much for your inputs for that, because I think there were several very important lessons to be learned in this session. So once again, thanks. I wish you a good day or a good evening wherever you are in the world, and we hope to see you next time in real life, I hope, so we can raise a glass after a successful summit. Thank you for now, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you.